Thank you so much for your time. I have thoroughly been enjoying your work, this book that I have just completed, plus your work at IONS, which I hope we're going to talk about, and the entire concept of channeling is fascinating. I know you do other things besides this, but I wonder if it'd be okay with you if we started off with me telling a short anecdote about
Yes,
the only exposure I directly had to channeling, which happened by accident. Yeah?
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, pleasure to be here with you, and I'd love to hear it.
Okay, cool. So, and maybe you can help me make sense of this. This happened a few decades ago already, but I was taken by a friend, college friend, in the middle of a lightning storm to some people that he knew. I did not know them. I didn't know what was going on. I thought we were just going to hang out with some people. And they turned the lights very low and lit a candle. And this is a friend I've known for a few years. And he's silent for like a long time. And then a very strange voice sort of bursts forth from him. I had no idea what was going on. I assumed at first that this is just a joke, and treated it that way for a while. But then it occurred to me that he is not joking at all. And the person that he claimed to be at that moment was, let's just say, a well-known evil figure from history, which I thought was very weird. And so, of course, I didn't know what to make of it. I started asking for evidence. Why should I believe anything that you're saying? And he provided this weird, again, the evidence was, oh, you're very close with, and this is a little bit strange and personal, but he's like, you're very close with your cat. And I'm like, yes. He goes, your cat will die within the year. I was like, what? And sure enough, that happened. And okay, so without going into all the very, very odd things that were said in this conversation, and the fact that the people around me also confirmed that he was saying things that he couldn't possibly have known. After a period of time, he looked like he was exhausted, and the experience came to a halt. Okay. Can you explain to me what occurred? Why? I mean, why? I know you can't really explain why, but why something so spontaneous and odd happened. And the last thing I know, I've thrown in a lot of stuff already, but later, like days later, this friend of mine had a spiritual mentor. And then the mentor told him that it was as if he took an M16 and pointed it at everyone in the room, and it was extremely bad what he did. Okay, that's my story. It's my only channeling story. What do you make of it?
Wow, there are so many incredible points in that story that I'm really excited to dive into. And so, from what you've shared, make up a name for your friend.
Let's call him Jim.
Okay. So it sounds like what Jim was doing was what I would call trance channeling. And before I describe trance channeling, I want to share what my definition of channeling is. Because when people hear that, there's so many different meanings that come to them. So I use a really broad definition of channeling, this kind of umbrella term that encompasses a wide, diverse range of phenomenon where we're able to access information and energy from beyond our normal five senses and from beyond often what we understand as time and space. And these phenomenon show up in many, many different ways, from just kind of like intuitive gut hunches, that just about everyone has said they've experienced, all the way to what you experienced, which is definitely more extreme, on the extreme end, called trance channeling, or some of the listeners might have heard of mediumship or mental mediumship. And then you have everything in between, like having a dream that comes true in the future, or, being able to, get a intuitive hit of what your cousin across the country, got into an accident or something like that, or, understanding mental impressions from other people, or telepathy. So there's many, many different experiences in that spectral range of getting information and energy from beyond our five senses. So let's zoom into this trance channeling piece, because I see that as one type of channeling. So trance channelers believe that their body is a vehicle for non-physical beings to speak through them. So just that one sentence.
Right. You said believe, I noticed.
Has a lot of loaded information in there, right? So this idea, kind of a spiritualist idea that there are spirits, that there are these, conscious entities that exist without a body, and that we can actually be in relationship with them in different ways, including this idea of trance channeling. Now, when I speak of trance channeling, it's a process that's done consensually, right? It's done with positive intent, with in relationship, in conversation with these apparent spirits, right? And the channeler chooses, yes, I am agreeing to do this. Yes, I only want the highest and best beings to come through me. And, there's kind of a protocol around that. Some people, and of course, our public media, might think of possessions or this whole kind of negative, evil, malignant type phenomenon. So that's not what I'm talking about when I talk about trance channeling. And I don't know if we want to go there. That's a whole nother conversation.
Maybe.
So it sounds like Jim, and I agree with his mentor, in a very poor way, went into a trance channeling state and was giving messages. Now, can we prove with our scientific tools that the person that Jim, was expressing was actually that being? No, we can't prove that. And so it's more about, how do we attempt with the tools that we have to collate evidence that might support that case. And so there's lots of theories kind of the origin of the information. Is it really Jim's unconscious? Is it some larger aspect of him? Is he picking up information just from this sort of informational field? Or is it really an actual separate entity that somehow is able to use his body? And we really can't prove that definitively one way or another. But I invite people, I know the human mind really wants to answer that question, and I do believe we'll be able to do that one day. But right now, I don't think we can with the tools that we have. And that what's more important is to focus on the message. So the message that was coming through to you and to the other people, like, was that beneficial? Was it useful? Was it actionable? Did it come through? Like this whole thing about your cat. I mean, how would he have known that, really? Did that help you? I don't know. We could argue both ways. But anyway, so I'll stop there and see if you have any thoughts or questions. But there's a lot to unpack in that.
In terms of proof, I assume you're familiar with Jim Tucker's work and reincarnation accounts in children.
Yes.
And they consider a case solved if they can get enough information about it that seems unlikely for the child to have known, right? So like saying enough things about the prior life that the child just couldn't have known, at a certain point it becomes implausible to think that the child was told about it or learned about it. It's just not. So in channeling somebody like this, let's say, couldn't we, in theory, ask the being enough questions about its former life or existence that could be verified later on in the same sort of way, where we could just check a number of boxes and say, you know what, no one knew the guy's sister's middle name, and therefore we could prove it?
Prove is a very strong word. And so, the way I think about it is bodies of evidence that are very compelling. And so as a scientist, I don't like using the word prove. Maybe, general people like using that word. But right now, this idea that humans have some aspect of themselves that continues after the body's physical death, to me, there is so much compelling evidence for that I personally, as Helané, with my Helané hat on, I believe that there is something after I die. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of more how I think about it. Like, we have these various bodies of evidence, like the reincarnation literature, like the near-death experience literature, like the very rigorous mediumship literature. There are all these different bodies of evidence, and we actually did a huge essay on that and won an award from the Bigelow Institute of Consciousness Studies. And I would direct listeners to that website because they have all the essays that kind of pull together all that evidence in a really compelling way. The evidence, in my opinion, is absolutely compelling and very, very strong, in my opinion. But there's always people who can poke a hole in it. They might say, oh, this person is getting that information through telepathy, and which is incredible.
Which is proving something else. Yeah.
But, it's not really a separate entity. And, what's funny is we'll know when we die, but then how do we then transmit that back? And then people say, well, near-death experiences are exactly that. But, materialists say, these are just grand hallucinations that are happening in the death throes of the brain.
Right.
And, I don't really want to argue that. We can if you want to, but
I don't know. I don't. Anyway. I agree with you, and I think that I think even the evidence there does not suggest that that's the case. The more I look into it, I'm certainly not an expert, but I have read a lot of the literature, and especially the more recent things seem to really challenge the plausibility of that idea. But fundamentally I agree with you. That something is going on. It does not seem readily explicable from materialist thinking, and is a challenge to that kind of thinking, and channeling is a unique aspect of all this that is worth plumbing, I think. Which hence I'm lucky to have this conversation with you. But can I ask you about the concept of spirit guides? Which is different than a deceased human who's communicating through another person. My understanding of a spirit guide is literally a spirit, some disembodied consciousness that I don't know necessarily how it exists or where it exists. But let me ask you this. So you talk about it in the book of getting guidance, and you yourself have the capacity to do this, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so you know in a much more tangible way than the rest of us what this is about. So the thing that I wanted to ask, it might seem like a funny question. If there are spirit guides, which again, entities that help us navigate through life, for lack of a better way of saying it, why don't they do a better job? Meaning, if they have so much insight and has such great perspective and know what's going to be good for us and what's not going to be good for us, why are we going through so much? And, and couldn't they be guiding us on paths that are more pleasing than the ones that many people are on?
Yes. Great question. And so from channeled material and various spiritual traditions, my understanding, and this isn't from a scientific perspective, is that there is this notion of free will and the idea that when we choose as a choice to come into this human body, that we have designed a life plan for the major lessons that we want to experience. And yet when we get here, there is a forgetting.
Right.
And we are completely, totally at choice. And that the spirit guides try to orchestrate, messages, synchronicities, opportunities to keep us on that life path that we have actually chosen for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, if we're not listening, that message doesn't come in. And even if we do hear it and we say, no, I've actually changed my mind, I want to do something different, then that's our choice to do that. That's my understanding from the channeled content and, spiritual traditions, that it's they can't force us. They can't override. Although there are so many anecdotes of interventions, actually, usually around saving people's lives, like people, we have thousands of anecdotes that we've collected from people in our research, and, people being like physically moved a number of feet that prevented them from getting hit by a car, or, just loud yelling in the ear, stop, which prevented some, something that would have killed them. And so we see a lot of those stories. And so in those instances, I wonder if there's some release of that non-intervention rule that's like, oh, it's actually not their time to go right now. It's not in the life plan. That's not what was kind of chosen. And so in that specific instance, we can intervene in a much more dramatic way. I don't know. I'm just kind of speculating here.
That's interesting. And I think that probably if you push them, many people have had odd moments that they just happened, they did hear something weird happened, and they just like swept it under the rug and chalked it up into, things happen category, and maybe didn't realize that something transcendental just happened to them, or maybe it's happening to us all the time and we just don't know what to call it, or how to explain it. I don't know. But the interesting thing about spirit guides, it almost seems like this is their job. Like they got hired somehow and that makes me wonder by who, to do this to help us. But what about people? What about the gym incident, right? It's not a spirit guide. This is some independent agent. My question is, why does it want to talk to us at this point? And part of the question is, when I study the near-death literature, for instance, one of the things that seems common is that the people who are just recently departed don't really care about this world anymore. They don't care about their bodies anymore. I heard one person, Mary Neal, say that she wasn't concerned about her family in any way anymore, like partly because she knew they'd be okay. But like this world just becomes uninteresting. So why are these entities bothering with us? Yeah.
Yes. Again, from a kind of spiritualist worldview, the idea is that when we do leave our physical bodies, that our spirit continues and that there's still a desire for experience and learning.
Mm-hmm.
And so this idea of taking on being a spirit guide, you said hired, who's hiring? And so, there's, levels doesn't feel like quite the right word, but there's levels. I'll just say levels. There's levels of experience and levels of wisdom in that state. And so someone might be invited to mentor a human as part of their experience and learning, that they would get to choose yes or no around that.
For themselves.
And then, yes. And then in terms of why a being would come through like your friend Jim, I think it depends on what their motivation is. Like, you didn't really share much about the content. If it was positive or negative, or, you said that they were an evil human, but were they actually still in that kind of negative polarity state? Or were they I was evil on Earth, but now I'm evolved and I'm here to share wisdom with you?
I don't recall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, again, spiritualist worldview, there's kind of layers of entities, and they have different intent. And, through kind of, I think, a properly done trance channeling practice, there is protocols in place to set up safe, protected, positive, intentful situations so that any messages or beings coming through are going to have a beneficial motivation, if you will.
Right.
And the purpose of that is to support humanity, to support humanity to wake up to their true nature, to choose to be on their life path, and understand that we're more than these bodies, that we are all interconnected, and that is kind of the fundamental nature of reality, and to support humanity understand that for all of our benefit, really.
Right. There does seem to be various arenas in which certain breadcrumbs are dropped to us, little hints that they're exactly as you're saying, that there's more to this picture than meets the eye. And when enough people have these kinds of experiences, it does make you sort of wonder, maybe there's something going on, that needs to be looked into. So I, again, agree with you on that. Can I ask you a question about channelers themselves as yes. people? Okay.
Yes. Before you do, I want to just share one more thing. I'm very interested in cross-referencing channeled content, because this whole idea about, well, what's coming through like the channelers in Brazil versus the channelers in the UK versus, are they actually getting similar content? And many of them are. There's very, very similar themes. And, the idea is that this message of our interconnectedness and the nature of reality needs to come through different channelers, different beings, different audiences, because perhaps it's such an important and vital message for humanity to understand right now.
Yes. Now and always.
Yes.
Yes. And I think it's always worth mentioning that the hallmarks of all these, or many, many of these, let's call them transcendental experiences, boils down to peace, love, unity, all the good stuff, and
Yes.
What an interesting thing that every time you seem to have a experience beyond the physical world, it gels into, those very universal, beautiful things, I think that's very hopeful and a good sign, but in terms of let's compare modern channeling, for instance, to the ancient theological way of looking at it, right? So we have a concept of prophecy. One of how I understand that, how prophecy is achieved is through moral excellence. That's one part of it, is you have to purify the vessel so much that, that the beyond has a foothold to gain, within the body. Would you say that that's true, that that's the way it works? Or,
Yes.
Can anyone just do it if they decide to, regardless of how they work on themselves?
I think it depends on what type of channeling you're talking about. I feel that all humans have the capacity to channel in some way on that spectrum that we talked about of those very diverse experiences, that it's kind of just an innate ability that humans have. And that the way it shows up for each individual is unique to them. We actually call that the noetic signature, and we've done this whole research program on it. And so some people may be very adept at, let's say, telepathy, or, getting mental impressions from other people, whereas others may be more adept at this trance channeling that we're talking about, right? And we're still trying to discover what creates that distinction. Is it something genetic, because we know that these abilities can sometimes run in families? Is it something about their personality or their interests? So we're still trying to discover what that is. And we have a few little hints here and there. Mm-hmm. And so back to this piece of prophecy, which, that prophecy can come through in various ways, depending on the prophet, right? Maybe they just get a download of information, or maybe they are doing trance channeling. And yet what I've seen through my own practice, through, studying many different traditions, that the more clear, I would use the word clear rather than pure, you are mentally, emotionally, physically, etc., the clearer your channel actually is, and that our mind and our ego can influence the channeling. And so the more you're aware of your own ego processes and makeup of your personality, the easier it is for you to bring through a clear message.
Mm-hmm. So there's a connection. I understand in terms of clarity, but does the clarity for you also include behavior, like striving to be the best person possible in a ethical way? Is that part of it?
Yes. How's that for a short
Yeah, good.
answer?
That's good. That's it. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah. So I teach a class called Best Practices of Channeling for people who want to learn how to channel. And included in that is this idea of intention and having positive, beneficent intention. And, people always ask, well, can't you just use this for bad? Is this just a neutral phenomenon that you can use either for good or for bad?
Right.
And so ethically, we can't really do a study on that, because, we don't want to set out to harm people. Okay, we want you to visualize to hurt this person. Or, maybe
Right.
You saw that movie, Men Who Stare at Goats, and the whole government.
Missed that one.
Yeah. So they were basically trying to use their intention to stop the heart of a goat. Right. And so there's all these stories of people who try to use it in a negative way. Mm-hmm. Is that possible? I think it is. But my kind of intuitive sense is that it doesn't work as well, that you have to be really skilled and work harder to hurt someone with that phenomenon than it is to help someone with that phenomenon. And again, this is just Helané's speculation, and it'll be nice to do a study on that. But we haven't quite, we don't really want to go around the ethics of doing a study like that.
How about if it's not to do evil to somebody, but how about if it's just to benefit yourself, like to pick the right stocks, or, to predict the future in a way that's going to help you? It's a little selfish, but it's not hurting anybody. Is it, you feel anything in there in terms of impropriety?
Well, I think what's fascinating about how channeling works is that we have our own layers of our own mind. And if you're not aware of unconscious motivators, that's going to play into your what you manifest. So like I might say, I really want this, new shiny red car, and I'm going to do my manifesting practice to like make that happen. And yet if I have an underlying belief that I'm not good enough and I don't deserve that I'm totally not aware of, it's not going to show up. The intention's not going to manifest in that way, because you're not clear and in integrity with what you're intending.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because some part of you saying, yes, I deserve this car. And then this whole other part of you is like, I actually don't. And so there's conflicting messages. And so what I think is almost more harmful than people consciously wanting to do evil and hurt people is the unconsciousness of much of humanity, of just being totally unaware of their own makeup and how it shows up in the world. This whole idea that our consciousness actually affects the physical world is so important. And that is something that we've been able to demonstrate through science, that our intention, our consciousness literally affects the physical world. And if people are unaware of that, they're not going within to kind of do their own personal work, then, there's all these like crazy intention signals flying all over the place that, manifest in what we're seeing today.
Right. Yes. And IONS has done great work along those lines. And I recommend to anybody check out the link that we're going to post, and to look into all the incredible research that you guys have done and are doing. Which I think is revolutionary, and will eventually be remembered as pivotal in the annals of science. But speaking of the science, and something that you mentioned in your book about the popularity of these notions in the MCU, in the Marvel film world,
yes.
Someone like Doctor Strange, who I think you mentioned specifically, do you feel that the depiction of those ideas in popular culture is beneficial to your work in terms of it like tantalizing people and sort of making it acceptable? Or is it just confirming to people that these are fantastical ideas that have no basis in reality? In other words, are films like that actually hurting the work at IONS and making people take it less seriously?
I don't think they're harmful. I think they're helpful in that it opens people's minds to the possibilities, and perhaps they can, or they want to, put themselves in Doctor Strange's shoes and say, wow, wouldn't that be amazing? And what if I could do that? And I think from an imagination level and for like a opening of people's minds to the possibility, I think it is helpful. What's not so great is that the way it's depicted is not what we're seeing, how it works. Like the whole like red lasers coming out of someone's eyes that does something, from what we've seen through our experiments, it's likely not a force. It's not like some force that travels from one point to another point through time. It is often instantaneous and can go long distances. And that's not something that's going to be following kind of classical physics rules, more aligned with a quantum physics model, although we haven't figured out the mechanics of that just yet. So I would say it's both. I love sci-fi. I love the Marvel movies. So I personally am in the camp that they're more helpful than harmful, in that they just open the possibility for people.
Okay, good. I like them too. But
yes,
yeah.
I will say that I think I can say this. Our team is working with producers to create a fictional
Oh, really?
series
Oh, nice.
that will be more aligned with the actual research.
Did you read Dan Brown's recent?
I did.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So it's
That
making
was
its way.
amazing.
It's making its way in.
Yes.
In a more authoritative way. It seems like as time goes
Yes.
on. Okay.
Yes. And he did an amazing job with that, and I think reflected the actual research in a very, very excellent way.
We got 3 minutes, and I want to see if I can get in 2 more questions.
Okay.
Wait, I know you have a 10 o'clock. We don't have to be right in 3 minutes, but let's see. One thing that occurred to me as I was reading your excellent book, does anyone ever channel information from beings who are physical but not of Earth? And if not, does it imply that there is no other life out there? Or does it, or maybe it doesn't imply anything. But in other words, has there ever been anyone who's claimed that they had contact with someone from the Nebula galaxy, or yes. Okay.
Yes. So, yes, there are many trance channelers who believe that the source of their information are extraterrestrials or beings in different star systems. And I've actually noticed that this trend has dramatically increased in the last 5 years or so, which I find very fascinating. So much so that I finished one study, and I'm analyzing the data from another study of just that, of trance channelers who believe that their source are extraterrestrials. And what does that mean? I mean, that's so incredible and fascinating. And so in the first study, we invited people who received messages that they thought were from ETIs, extraterrestrial intelligences, and we collated all that. And then our collaborator has something called UFODEX, which is collated materials from the military and different disclosure movements from kind of like the materialist 3D world. And then we asked those 2 separate data sets 10 questions and looked at the semantic similarity between them. So are the channelers getting similar information to what is being disclosed through 3D avenues? And there was actually a really high correspondence, which I find very fascinating. Anyway, so that was a unique study, and that's currently under peer review. Hopefully that'll be published soon. And then my current study that I'm analyzing right now, I invited trance channelers who believed that they could channel extraterrestrials. We set intentions for them to do so. And I did a structured interview when they were in this trance channeling state, supposedly channeling Pleiadians, Arcturians, and Andromedans. And I, had like 30 questions. So I did 30 interviews, and I'm now doing analyses on those to see, okay, so for the Pleiadian interviews from these different channelers, how similar was the information that came through? And how similar is the information across all the interviews for the same channeler? And so AI has really helped us do qualitative analysis. So you can use these sophisticated tools to really see how similar the content is. And is that going to prove that they were extraterrestrials? No, but I think that's a really fascinating place to start to kind of see how the content relates across channelers and across ETs. And then we'll do a thematic analysis looking at, well, what are they saying? Like, what's the actual content? And is that interesting, useful, helpful in any way?
Just a quick reflection, and then the last question. But it's so great because you're an actual scientist,
Yes.
but you talk like a real spiritual person, and and it's to me like it's a perfect synthesis of modalities. I know for a lot of people it's probably very jarring, scientists are supposed to be cold and clinical and only interested in data but of course when you're using those things, but you're using it for such a great purpose, to me, and so it's a pleasure to have this kind of conversation. So thank you. Last thing I was just wondering about is when you yourself have these channeling experiences, what do they feel like? Like, is it pleasant? Is it difficult? Do you leave it feeling energized or drained? Like, what's it feel like?
So I experience many different channeling phenomenon, and they show up differently depending on what's happening. And I want to just make a comment on your previous statement. So I really try to be clear in these interviews, and I hope I've done so here. Like when I have my scientist hat on and what's like, hey, this is the evidence, this is what we've seen, and what's, here's Helané speculating or just sharing her personal experiences. So I just want to say that very explicitly.
Yes, I understand.
Because I do honor both. And I think it's really important to highlight, hey, this is what I know through scientific tools, and this is my personal experience, and take it for what it's worth. So when we did the Noetic Signature Research Program, we found 12 different characteristics for how people express their noetic signature, this idea of receiving, wisdom, intuitive wisdom. So some people, myself included, I get goosebumps. So if I hear something that kind of resonates as a truth for me, I'll get goosebumps all over my body. And then it's like, okay, pay attention, go that way. And a lot of people get similar things. So just in my daily life, I will have those kind of intuitive hits, or I'll, get an inspirational idea that doesn't feel like it came from my mind, that it was kind of like dropped in, or I'll just have a knowingness that I need to go check on my kid right now. And, oh, he sprained his ankle at the soccer practice, things like that. So that's in daily life. In terms of the trance channeling specifically, myself and others, there's a training involved. And so you kind of build yourself up for it. And for myself, I have a very strong scientific mind. The hardest part was kind of relaxing that part of my mind, because there is a kind of surrender that needs to happen to allow, you to start speaking. And it is the most bizarre experience that I've ever had, to have words coming out of my mouth that I have no clue what I'm about to say. And, when I first started, it felt a little uncomfortable, not bad, but just very different. And, at times could feel a little overwhelming. But I worked with what I believe are my guides to do it in a way that feels comfortable to me. And I don't do it as a profession. I just do it for myself, if I want to. And so we also just published a paper. There is a protocol if you want to learn how to do it. And I'm hoping to do a study on this with actual scientists and teach scientists how to trance channel, because the availability of information in the mind makes a difference. So an 8th grade graduate is not going to have the vocabulary to talk about scientific concepts when they're channeling versus, a PhD in physics. So I want to get more PhD in physics people with that education to learn how to trance channel. Number one, I want to see if they can do it and their experience of it, which in and of itself would be incredible. And then could they actually channel information that was a much higher scientific caliber that we could follow up on in some way. So that paper is published, this whole protocol to learn how to trance channel. And I can give you that link.
Yeah, I think we'd like to include that. Well, this was a fascinating conversation, and thank you for so openly answering all of my questions. And as I mentioned, I think the work you're doing and Dr. Radin and all the folks at IONS is critically important. Actually would encourage people to support your work if they can financially, and to read the literature and to find out much more about what's going on, because I think it's very important. So thank you for your work. Thank you for your time. And we'll let you know when this comes out, and hopefully it can continue to affect a lot of people.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. And hope to speak to you again.
Okay. Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye.
Thanks so much, Adam.
My pleasure. Go do your 10 o'clock and we will get in touch for the links, and we'll let you know when it comes out, and thank you again.
Okay, great.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.